Greetings, friends. You are on the Military Reports channel. And today we will discuss with you the situation in Ukraine on the 6th of June, 2024 year. A lot of things have happened today, so let's get started. And we will start with you from the Kharkiv direction, where the North group of troops, continuing the assault actions, may even be already beginning to repel counterattacks from the side of the USU. We have a report for the last day from the group of troops of the North. Again, well, essentially the same moments. Offensives are underway, individual quarters are being cleaned up. According to the Northerners, at the moment, fierce battles are being conducted on the territory of the aggregate plant, and are clearing the blocks around it from the remnants of the armed forces of Ukraine, as well as squeezing it out of the area of high-rise buildings. Let's go back to Severny Volchansk with you. In other words, according to the report of the North group of forces over the past day of fighting, the main fighting was conducted in the area of the aggregate plant, and according to the information received from this report, it can be assumed that they are so reported that the first building in the area of the plant itself was taken under control. It is difficult to say which buildings were taken under control. Also, according to, let's say, the report of the North group of troops, the cleaning of, let's say, the citadels, that is, the central part of the northern, let's say, central high-rises, continues. It is difficult to say where exactly, in what status this place is now, and at what stage, let's say, it is also difficult to say. Let's go back to this post, to this report. Here, the most interesting thing, of course, begins at the bottom, and begins. Having completed the transfer of the reserves of the armed forces of Ukraine, for example. The armed forces of Ukraine have begun to occupy the frontiers for the counteroffensive. That is, as of the morning of the 6th of June, already Russian resources close to official sources report that the APU has finished regrouping, has finished summing up reserves and resources. Let me remind you that they pulled together, let's say, soldiers from all directions, from all over Ukraine. And here the map, let's say, has not been fully updated by division. But if, let's say, you follow the summary of the Ministry of Defense, then there are already assault detachments of people in the Volchansk direction. And also of interest today, according to the summary of the Ministry of Defense, units of the 110th Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine appeared in this direction. In other words, the brigade that, say, 3 months ago was responsible for the defense of Avdiivka is located here today. At least they were transferred. Next, what is worth noting? However, let's just say it's worth noting that the APU does not seek to let the most, let's say, trained units into battle. At the moment, there is an attempt to assemble units from, say, soldiers recently mobilized there, who have been trained there for a month or two, and they will be the first wave of the offensive. The main purpose of which is to exhaust the units of the Russian Federation, after which more or less trained and experienced detachments are already leading into battle. But if we talk about the 6th of June, then today, let's say there is some activity. And there will be the largest number of posts of information received from the line Ternavaya-Varvarovka, Izbitskaya capital Bergovatka, Count Rubeznoy. In other words, in fact, the main fighting, let's say, some event unfolded in this area. And in general, this is understandable. If the APU has really finished regrouping, then at the moment, of course, after the completion of this process, it is necessary to restore logistics and supplies first of all. And let me remind you that during, let's say, the first days of the offensive operation, the Russian units literally managed to take control of the Bergovka and the Elder, thereby reaching the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass River, including Ogurtsev, Gadish, and, in fact, the APU lost up to 30, possibly up to 40% of the logistics that went through these roads, through these forests. Now, of course, in order to minimize losses, to optimize combat operations, it is necessary for the APU to restore control over the settlements of the capital and over the settlement of Bergovatka. Here, in principle, the bridgehead is convenient, since there are no fields, there is a forest on the south side. In principle, Russian units concentrate all their forces in the forests. That is, the battles will be fought for this locality, but most likely in the near future. The capitals of Bergavodka will go into the gray zone, since it will also be impossible for Russian units to defend themselves here. It will be much better for Russian units to defend, say, along the perimeter of the forest. In other words, it will essentially be a gray zone, but it is unlikely that you will be able to regain control of the main supply routes. But again, the main task is to be able to restore control over the capital of Bergavodka as much as to move the Russian artillery away from the main pontoon crossings, which are currently laid mainly on. But it is in this area, and here, that the main supply of these takes place. It would be desirable for Ukrainians to have this area for the main supply of the unit in Volchansk, due to the fact that this area is practically located. Shot through by Russian units, the APU is forced to use a very wide supply shoulder through Kharkov, then through the same Chugev. And already from Chugev to the White Well. From the White Well is already Lupus. Very inconvenient. And when it would be possible, for example, to conduct the same supply through Kharkov, Kutuzovka, Paramoga. And then from Paramoga, in the same frontier, and already at the Volchans. That is, the path is 2, maybe even 3 times shorter. And here, as you can see, today, from the very morning, let's say, information is being received that Russian units have begun assault operations in the direction of the settlement of Ternavaya. That is, here is the settlement of Ternavaya. However, I think it's worth interpreting this information differently. It is unlikely that Russian units have launched an offensive operation. Let me remind you that here, according to the information we have, you have concentrated significantly more resources and reserves than the Russian side, so it is extremely unprofitable to attack here. It's easier to defend or maneuver here. And we see artillery duels with you. Today, the first shots of, let's say, artillery training, artillery strikes by the 36th Brigade of the AFU Marines on the settlement of Bergavodka Staritsa are being published. Drones are working. In other words, a sweep is being carried out, preparations are being made, strikes are being made on armor. Strikes are being made on heavy equipment, on tanks, and preparations are being made for further assault actions. The Russian side, in turn, strikes at the settlement of Rubeznoy, trying to suppress and destroy the Ukrainian artillery, which supports the offensive a little to the north. There are Lassets working here, artillery is working, and most likely, after the completion of this regrouping, the armed forces of Ukraine made a number of attempts to advance towards the capital and Bergavodka. And these posts on the part of Ternova most likely indicate, let's say, the introduction of additional reserves from the Russian Federation in order to distract attention and disrupt plans to attack the capital of Bergavodka. That is, while the APU was advancing here, Russian units were trying, let's say, to alarm in the direction of Ternavaya. While they are missing any information about the results of this battle, perhaps it will become more or less clear in the near future. But again, there are already some. For several days in a row, it was Russian sources who reported possible attempts of a counteroffensive from the Ukrainian side in this direction. We discussed Lupus itself with you, no new geolocations, no new news. It is also reported by one second party about advances, about taking additional quarters, but according to geolocations. This does not yet find any reflection on the map. And, of course, there is a fairly effective counter-battery struggle on the Russian side. Here on these frames, let's say, another acacia was identified during reconnaissance activities, which was destroyed most likely as a result of a Lancet strike. And in the area of the White Well, there is a similar story. Another howitzer somewhere along the forest belt was hitting the advancing Russian units, identified as the result of reconnaissance activities, and destroyed. This is a D-30 howitzer, again with the use of a Lancet. Then we are moving with you to the Kopensky direction, where a large-scale offensive is being conducted along the line from Persharovny, yes, let's say, Klymychika. Here is a settlement, that is, Andriivka or Rizovka. What do we have in the direction? We have artillery training, artillery strikes in the area of Stepovaya Novoselka. The footage was published by Russian sources. Artillery strikes on the assault units of the armed forces of Ukraine. Perhaps even on the retreating units of the armed forces of Ukraine. At least, based on the frames, it can be determined that most likely there is a retreat. And in connection with what the retreat was taking place today, Russian sources, or rather Ukrainian sources, again published a series of, cuts of strikes and drones in Beer. And one of the episodes was deployed in the area of the Nilisha River. And the rot is more accurate, and blows were struck here, which confirms that Russian units are trying to bypass a typical Novoselyovka, observing a certain distance, and from the northeast and north, in order to take a possibility point, close it in a pincer, and continue to sort out more or less, let's say, such operational space. And with positions unfavorable for the APU for the contour strikes and maneuvering. Then we move with you to the south in the area of Stilmakovka. Fierce fighting is unfolding here. So far, little information is coming. There are some geolocations, there are some fab hits and arrivals, explosions, warehouse work. Well, that is, there is definitely an assault on Stilmahovka. That is, it is not something that is, let's say, fleeting. This is really fighting. While no other side is speculating much in this direction, they do not publish additional information. Everything is brief, concise. No one wants to take risks. No one wants to throw bravura expressions and hat-making. Everyone is waiting for some kind of turning point. It is reported that Russian units have expanded the control zone in Rozovka, taking control of up to 50% of the settlement. Then we go with you to the Limansky direction. Here, as you can see, there are several destroyed howitzers using counter-battery warfare with the use of artillery strikes. In other words, there is also some kind of military turnover, military, let's say, turmoil, without any serious attempts to attack. Although some sources report that Ukrainian units have taken a number of counteroffensive actions on the part of Mittens, in the direction of Teshka, and it seems that Teshka is currently under the full control of the armed forces of Ukraine. So far, we have no information confirming this. In the Seversky direction, which has already been ruined for a day, in my opinion, there are just ashes left from this settlement. However, despite the fact that almost the entire settlement has been wiped off the face of the earth, the armed forces of Ukraine are finding a place where they can, let's say, keep more personnel. Therefore, on a regular basis, strikes are being carried out on farms, on buildings, every square centimeter collapses, where there is an opportunity for APU soldiers to hide. According to Razdulovka, in my opinion, no information has been received for the third day that could be used to confirm the control of the Russian units of the strongholds located from the northeastern Razdolka. We're talking about this line. But let me remind you that a few days ago, a very well-known resource, more or less, let's say, published information about taking these supports, but to this day this information has not been confirmed. Then we are moving with you 4 hours yar. Here, as it were, no information has been received to specify the situation in the Kalinovka area. Most likely, there is a serious counterfight, and so far, neither side can take the initiative under its control. Some pro-Russian sources claim that during the fighting, the Russian unit made another attempt to cross the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal in the area of the Golubkovsky Stupa and the German forest, and try to enter the new quarter, as you can see, drawing new maps, adjusting, but there is no geolocation yet. Perhaps this is information coming from the field. This is the third or fourth attempt, the third or fourth post of such content from various sources. In other words, this most likely indicates that there are really fighting going on. However, again, here it is not possible for the Russian units to completely reverse the course of events in their favor. In the Kleshayevsky direction, we observe very strong activity of Russian unmanned aerial vehicles and aircraft. In the area of strong points, located southwest of the settlement, we see with you a large number of geolocations, artillery strikes. That is, obviously preparation. Preparations are underway, artillery training, in Pevedrin training on the positions of Ukrainian soldiers, in order to prepare the terrain before the further active phase of the offensive on the ground. Based on the intensity and focus of the strikes, most likely there is some kind of rush, and in the near future, Russian units will make their first attempts to storm this particular forest field, including this stronghold, and further, with an attempt to reach the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal, and, in fact, cut this direction into 2 parts. after subsequently trying to deal with in two directions, that is, between Ivanovo and this support, and between Kurdyumovka by the same support separately. This will probably allow us to deal with this area more quickly. Then we are moving with you to the Avdiivka direction, from where a large amount of information comes. Let's say that the pro-Ukrainian cartographers of Deep State claim that during the fighting, during the assault operations, Russian units managed to expand the control zone in the direction of the village of Kalinova. At the moment, let's say this piece of the map, which we have just painted over, is under the control of a subdivision of the Russian Federation. There is a small strong point in the fields, a small pool here, on which, as I understand it, the defense is based. Or there is an offensive. It is difficult to say what further tasks the Russian soldiers face in the direction. There is a company stronghold south of Kalinova, and the village of Kalinova itself. There is a small beam here, but it is obvious that the offensive is being conducted further. Perhaps the main task of this offensive will also stop for the duration of the offensive, to secure the flanks while the main Russian units are trying to storm Novoalexandrovka. Perhaps the new Alexandrovka will be a kind of support, let's say, defense, a support node of defense in this direction. But then such a serious offensive is being conducted here, but the idea is still unclear. But the idea is clear to expand the control zone, but for what purpose there is an exit into the fields of an essentially potash unit of the Russian army. Well, this is an interesting, let's say, such an idea. Then we are moving with you in the direction of the Falcon. The footage is coming in, according to the author of this video. The soldiers of the 47th Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine are retreating mechanized. They are retreating towards the village of Sokol, that is, they are retreating from these small water resources. There are separate shots of destroyed APU equipment in the same direction. In these frames, we can observe with you the Russian FP Varin, who tried to drown out most likely with some kind of rap. And now a blow is being struck at a Ukrainian tank. And here, that is, well, it is also being conducted on the Falcon offensive. Of interesting things, it is worth noting that according to the incoming information, the 68th Yager Brigade has lost up to 70% of its personnel and is currently being withdrawn for manning. Information is also being received from the artillery pocket. Information continues to be received about the destruction of additional Western equipment. In these frames, we will be able to watch with you the drone strikes in Beer on the American Abrams tank. I remind you that this is also the area of responsibility of the 47th Brigade. They are equipped with all these weapons, but they cannot roll out all the equipment outside the Charles Reservoir on Novoselovka first, since there are a large number of barriers, water barriers, and all bridges, crossings are controlled by Russian units. In fact, it destroyed. Then we are moving with you in the direction of Krasnogorovka Georgievka. There is a slight adjustment for the locality itself. About the Ukrainian deep state assures that the Russian units went to Sumy Street. That is, if we summarize all the news from this resource about the Ukrainian, then at the moment, Russian units control approximately this part of the settlement itself. Of course, the progress is significant, and this, among other things, a large number of high-rise buildings in the central part have passed under the control of Russian units. The Ukrainian side has literally 2 rows of high-rises left on the western, northwestern part, after which it will simply begin to be a village, which will be extremely difficult to hold, due to the fact that the main part of the high-rises is under the control of divisions of the Russian Federation. To clean up, let's say, the advancement of paths, offensive routes, Russian units widely, and use the flamethrower system of the sun, which processes positions in let's say, in low-altitude buildings tightly. And we see with you firm the result of another raid by the sun. And for the second day in a row, information has been received that the Russian units have not yet confirmed their advance in Georgievka and full control over the settlement. While we are not in a hurry to correct the map, we are waiting for more or less distinct geolocations there that will confirm this. Or perhaps a report from the Ministry of Defense, or from the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, but everyone is silent, except for individual cartographers. But most likely, we also confirm this information, most likely Georgiev Dug, but again I would like to follow some principles. Then we are moving with you to the Novomikhailovka-Konstantinovsky direction. The most fierce fighting has unfolded here. In the area of Ilyinka, Russian units of the 38th Guards Artillery here continue to hunt and destroy Ukrainian howitzers. Ukrainian artillery. Additional 119th, 20s, 30s are destroyed by Lancets, destroyed during a counter-battery struggle. In other words, all these artillery, all these installations are being brought gradually, constantly Kalinka, Elizavetovka. In order to somehow stop the advance or slow down the advance of Russian units in the direction of Konstantinovka. Based on geolocation, it can be assumed that the main blow that the Russian units are trying to make, as it were, is directed to the north of Konstantinovka in this private sector. Since it is perhaps easier to attack here due to the fact that it will be difficult to transfer units from southern Konstantinovka. Since there are bridges here and it is possible to control them in principle. Today, a large number of shots of geolocation of work by drones in this particular direction were published. That is, it is obvious that there was some kind of another raid by a large swarm of FP buckets with the aim of cleaning up, destroying personnel, equipment in the dugout, fortifications. That is, cleaning up the entire area for the further offensive of Russian units along this route. Although, if we talk about, let's say, the 79th Brigade, which is responsible for defense, they published a large number of posts today. Here, let's say it is reported that the 79th Brigade managed to possibly conduct a counterattack and re-establish itself on the outskirts of Paraskovy. That is, it is possible that it is destroyed again along the bridge. Somewhere in these bushes, there are units of the 79th Brigade, whose main task is to prevent the further advance of the Russian army. Again, the 79th Brigade reports that in the southeastern Konstantinovsky units, there are fierce battles and shelling from the Russian Federation. That is, for the second day in a row, the 79th Brigade confirms the possible potential presence of Russian units already in the southeastern part. So far there are no geolocations, no confirming frames, but there is an extremely high probability that the fighting is already underway on Shevchenko Street, Mir Street, Chkalov Street in the locality itself. There is also a counter-battery struggle. During the last day, several shots of the destruction, including of mortar guns of the armed forces of Ukraine, were also published in the area of the central and eastern part of the settlement. And the last post from the 79th in connection with the big problems with the personnel, and with a lack of understanding where the Russian units will attack, it was decided from the side of the USU to stretch the line of defense from, say, the composition that is available along the entire Paraskovevka along the Arc, that entire Konstantinovka along the Arc, and understanding that this is an extremely unfavorable situation, on the one hand. Perhaps every direction is covered, it is due to big problems with personnel, with supplies and reinforcements. This makes a very rare defense from more or less serious, harmful, yes, that is, perhaps with a more or less successful strike. A successful push of some kind, then the units located in one or another area will simply not be able to withstand the pressure. And this will lead to a breakthrough of the defense, and possibly a deepening along enough in the western part of the settlement. In other words, the assault is underway, we are waiting for additional information. In the area of Vodian Triangle Vodian Uglidar Mikolskaya, the strong points of the 72nd Mechanized Brigade are being cleaned up in Beer by drones. A large number of personnel is also possible in the near future. We should expect the resumption of hostilities in the direction of Vodian Uglidar. Then we are moving with you to Staromersko Eurozodno. After a very long pause, Russian units published footage of the assault operations. In these frames, we just see the very movements of the column. A tank, one Beha with personnel, is moving towards the Wetyali River. Well, in these frames it's just a promotion, nothing more, not even a landing. That is, perhaps some kind of cropped, let's say, here is the video, but if you go back to the map. We were moving along approximately this route, and the main task in this case was to exit, in fact, to the road connecting Staromerskaya and Urozhnaya. Maybe now? Well, the map has been updated, of course. And we remember with you that according to Staromersky, this is part of the gray zone. since it is most likely also under the control of the Russian army. In general, if we sum up all of the extremely high probability that even a land corridor has already been established between and Staromayorsky Krop and most, a significant part of this small agglomeration, 60 to 70%, is already under the control of Russian units. There is no important news in the work direction, and there is very high activity in the Kamian direction. Pyatakotki, most likely in the near future, will also become the most important target for Russian units. There will be another attempt to reach the small Sherbaki. Sherbaki is typical. Processing on these frames, you see the sun, and perhaps after that attempts were made to attack, but we do not know about them yet. Then we are moving with you to the Kherson direction, which, well, is very interesting. Before we return to Kherson, there are a couple of points on Krivoy Rog. The latest satellite images of the Krivoy Rog, so to speak, thermal power plant have been published. It turns out on Zelenodolskaya. And according to satellite images, we see smoke with you. Russian sources seem to note that, let's say, the thermal power plant of the CHP is functioning, so in the near future, we should expect new strikes on this electricity generation facility. In the area of Krivoy Rog, let's say at the airfield, footage of a Lancet strike on a Ukrainian Su-25 attack aircraft, which was peacefully resting on the runway, was published. Here we see the footage with you. We see attempts on the part of the APU to suppress, say, the rebomb movement, but it failed. And all 25th was damaged, perhaps even destroyed. Maybe it was a mock-up. Of course, we don't know that. Then we are moving with you to the Kherson direction. We discussed with you that the AFU units have transferred a significant number of Marines from Kherson to Kharkiv. And the first geolocations have already begun to appear there. Just today, we discussed the geolocation of the 36th Marine Corps. And information is already being received from various sources that the deeper direction is bare. In other words, this is the most important conclusion that can be drawn based on the events. From the geolocations that we received this week, the Kherson direction is absolutely bare. Russian units are advancing wherever they can get through. It was only yesterday that we discussed the promotion in the Dachas area. Here today, footage of an artillery strike and the destruction of another epicenter, a store with storage materials, has been published, according to sources on the ground, that firefighters extinguished in bulletproof vests. It may be speculation, just throwing oil on the fire, but in general it is reported that it was destroyed in a non-functioning warehouse, let's say. Here, in my opinion, even with the armor, they are standing here. Yes, you see, firefighters are standing with armor plates. There is, of course, a high probability of detonation, and there are bullets, and so yes, fragments, and so on and so forth. And from the important fact that yesterday we discussed the capture of Dachas, today we received the first shots of how Russian units began gradually clearing the islands north of the market. The first amphibious operations began. Attempts were made to squeeze out the Jesus of the islands, and already in the Isu. They are starting to work in Beer as disembodied Marines of the Russian army in the delta of these islands. The delta of, say, the Dnieper, in the bed of the Dnieper. In other words, we are seeing these days with you now. In the coming months, of course, no one is landing on Kherson, is unlikely to plan in the near future, however. To squeeze out into Jesus from the islands in the market area, squeeze out into Jesus from the Dachas area. Completely take control of the entire channel, including in the Zomi Savlataysky branch, there is an extremely high probability. And we want good prerequisites for Russian units to complete this mission with success. And at the same time, it continues to publish footage of artillery strikes on the entire bank of the Dnieper, which are under the control of the armed forces of Ukraine and Ukraine, large strikes, destruction of warehouses, strikes on temporary deployment points. But, that is, the Kherson direction will be very hot. This is unequivocal. It is due to the fact that it is now the Galino direction, and most of the units have been transferred to Kharkiv. And if the Ukrainians really decide on the Kharkiv operation before the Washington NATO summit, then there are good chances for Russian units to also attack Kherson and perhaps they are unlikely to achieve strategic superiority there, or return to Kherson under control. However, it is possible to create problems here, including, let's say, destroying Ukraine's plans for the Kharkiv counteroffensive. The main Directorate of Intelligence of Ukraine, in turn, published more footage of, let's say, hunting for Russian vessels in the Crimea region. And we see here how they swim in the area of the settlement. Here we have Crimea, and here is a locality. What do we have here? Black Sea. There is a hunt for Russian ships in the Black Sea area, but in the end nothing was found. As a result, some kind of boat, maybe even a fishing boat, simply understood that they would not go back like that, because they could be suppressed, intercepted. Therefore, some was destroyed. Fishing, maybe even ships.